Just a few quick disclaimers about this conversation. I'm fully aware that discussions about gender and race are, or can be, highly political in nature. This is not a podcast about politics. This is a podcast about listening to the stories and experiences of other people in and around our profession to see if we can learn from them or maybe find a new perspective and increase our understanding and empathy towards ourselves and others. If we have an agenda that we promote on this podcast, it's one of love over fear, however that manifests itself. I'm also aware, or people who are smarter than me tell me, that from a psychology perspective, the topic of gender is way more complicated than I could ever hope to address in a single podcast. This is not a psychology podcast, and this episode is not intended as advice for anyone experiencing challenges around gender. Kate shares her story with honesty and passion, but it's her story, and your story is your story. If there is advice in here, then I'd say it's for those of us who have the opportunity to better understand and create space for others. So let's get to it. But before we get to our episode, I want to start with a little New Year's story, or two stories actually, that have absolutely nothing to do with inclusion or veterinary science, to welcome you to 2023. I started 2023 with an early morning surf. Early, not because I'm actually that kind of person, but because shift work and kids messes with my circadian rhythm, and because the birds where I live are many and loud, so whether I want it or not, I'm usually up early. And also early because Noosa, my favorite surf spot, is very popular and usually very crowded, especially on public holidays. And I always live in hope that an early start will award me with a parking spot and a slightly less crowded lineup. Particularly on the 1st of January, I was kind of hoping that hangovers would keep many people in bed for a few extra hours. So I grabbed a shitty garage coffee and endured the 45-minute drive to get there. Unfortunately, my theory about hangovers and early starts proved incorrect. So after an additional 45 minutes of driving around looking for parking, I eventually squeezed into a spot about 2 kilometers away from the car park closest to the surf. Except that my intended destination is still about an additional 2 kilometers away from where I actually wanted to surf. So instead of a relaxing surf touring in the new year, I had a sweaty 4-kilometer slog with a 9-foot longboard under my arm. In the water, things were just as busy, and my session was soured by a battle for waves and multiple drop-ins on many of the waves that I did actually manage to catch. Plus, the raging sweep along the point made it unnecessarily hard just to stay in the right spot. Oh, and then I mentioned that I'm surfing a new board, which meant that I also messed up the few waves that I did have to myself. After just 2 hours, my high levels of irritation and low levels of fitness ended a frustrating session, made even more frustrating by the additional walk back to the car. Besides, I had to come home to finish this episode. Great start to the new year, right? I started 2023 with an early morning surf. Over the years, I've naturally become more of a morning person, which means I get to utilize the best part of the day. Besides, it means I get to wake up with birdsong instead of an alarm. I grabbed a coffee from the garage down the road. I'm still thrilled that I can get a half-decent cup of caffeine at any time of day or night for just $1. And I enjoyed one of my favorite podcasts on the 45-minute drive there. As expected, the parking in Noosa on a public holiday was a challenge. The problem is that the better the surf gets, the more scarce the parking becomes. And the surf was good. After a frustrating 45-minute search, I eventually found a spot about 2 kilometers away from the car park closest to the surf. This meant that instead of a relaxing surf touring in the new year, I started with a 4-kilometer run along a path through coastal forest that hugs one of the most spectacular bits of coastline in the world, just to make sure that I'm nice and warmed up by the time I hit the water. I spent the next 2 hours sharing some near-perfect surf with a bunch of other equally stoked surfers and trying to figure out the quirks of my new board on long peeling faces running down the points. Eventually, I let the sweep that always accompanies great surf at Noosa drag me more than halfway back to the car while taking in one of my favorite views of forest and ocean and Mount Karura in the distance glowing under the first light of 2023. What a spectacular start to the new year. And now, I get to finish up another episode just for you. Okay, so those two stories are both factually accurate. That's really how my year started, and all of those things really did happen to me. The first version was trying to establish itself in my head as the truth for a while, especially when I saw that lack of parking. The only difference between those two stories are interpretation and intention. And that's my New Year's message to you. Actually, let's call it a New Year's prediction. I won't wish you well for the year ahead. I won't tell you to smash it. or tell you that I hope that 2023 is your best year yet, because I kind of know how your year will go. Some good things will happen, hopefully, surely. You'll probably achieve some goals. You'll have days where work is fulfilling with interesting cases and good outcomes. You'll have many wins. You might even make that shot for the rubbish bin with a syringe cap on the first go. You could fall in love, make some money. You might even have a kid. You might get a pay raise, pass your exams, get that dream job. You will have many things happen to you that you don't like. Some of these things will just be annoying and frustrating, but you might even experience genuine tragedy. You'll have crappy days at work when nothing goes right. Clients will push you, people will do selfish things, dumb things, they'll disappoint you, maybe even betray you. You'll disappoint yourself. You'll fail. You'll age another year. But if you're lucky, which you probably are, you'll be alive a year from now, and you'll look back at 2023 and you'll think to yourself, that was a good year, or that was a shit of a year. I hope 2024 is better. But the reality is that whether it's a good year or a bad year depends almost entirely on expectation and interpretation and what you make of it. So my wish for you and for me is that we have the wisdom to appreciate each moment of 2023, good or bad, as a gift and as an opportunity. Okay, back to our episode. Let's introduce our guests. Dr. Kate Toyer and Dr. Cam Raw are both vets and also the host of the Veterinary Kaleidoscope podcast, where they explore the experiences of people from many diverse backgrounds in the veterinary world. Kate graduated from vet school in 1995, got married in 1996, and bought into a veterinary practice in 2000 with her partner. In 2007, she gained memberships of the ANZ CVS in veterinary surgery and also was awarded the College Prize for her work on developing one of the first interactive online courses with the then PGF, or now the Sydney University CVE. She and her partner had 3 kids, just your average high-performing veterinary life, right? But, there's a big but. Everyone thought that the person who was living this life was a man called Adam. In 2011, Kate told her wife that she wasn't a normal guy. And in 2015, she started HRT and publicly transitioned, becoming the only out trans female veterinarian in the world at the time. In 2016, Kate founded Australian Rainbow Veterinarians and Allies as a support and advocacy organization for LGBTIQA+ people in the veterinary industry, which she currently leads. And in 2021, she joined forces with Dr. Cam Raw to start the Veterinary Kaleidoscope. When Kate isn't working, she likes surfing, sailing, swimming, pole dancing, playing clarinet, and wearing outrageously sparkly and glamorous dresses. Not usually all at the same time, though she has been known to try. Dr. Cam is a Palawa man with family links to the far south of Lutruwita, or Tasmania. Over the 9 years since graduating, he's worked in cattle practice in Victoria, mixed practice in the UK, remote small animal practice in the Northern Territory, and now in a teaching and research role in Melbourne. Providing veterinary care and building relationships in remote communities across the top end have provided pathways for him to explore his cultural identity in ways he never imagined growing up. And some of the major focuses of his current work relate to Indigenous representation, mental well-being, and diversity and inclusion as a whole. And these two are the perfect guides through this conversation around inclusion and diversity, including what these terms even mean. Like, are they the same thing? And if not, how should we approach them? And how does the vet profession fare when it comes to being inclusive? Spoiler alert, we may not be as good as you think we are. And of course, how do we get better at it? Dr. Kate totally wins the bad decisions and good stories question and tells us about something called gender dysphoria and what it has in common with what she calls veterinary dysphoria. Cam tells us about the rediscovery of his Indigenous Australian culture, his journey and his work in remote Australian communities. And I get to ask all the questions I've ever wanted to ask, but I'm normally too nervous to ask. Just before we jump in, we have a sponsor for this episode, and we're going to have an ad, but it's a different kind of ad. It's not for a product or a company or a service. We're doing a job ad, and it's the easiest ad I've ever had to do so far because it's for my job. Well, sort of. I'm not leaving, but where I work need more of me. See, I do my clinical work for Animal Emergency Australia, or AES as most people would know them, which is a group of emergency hospitals here in Australia. And I work at the Sunshine Coast Clinic, which is by a long shot the AES branch with the best location. And we, like the rest of every single business in the world, need more team members. I mean, seriously, what's happened to everyone during COVID? Every single industry I speak to has the same issues. I feel like there must be a few million people still stuck in isolation who haven't heard the news that we're allowed to head outside. Like that dude who hid in the jungle still fighting his own personal Second World War until something like the 1970s. And one day somebody's going to discover all these people and be like, hey, we have a vaccine. You can come back to work now. But I digress. I would love some new teammates. My bosses are hiring and they're giving the podcast some money just so I can tell you why you should come work with us. Because that's the kind of company it is. But I'll let you listen to Kate and Cam first, and then we'll tell you more at the end of the episode. So if you're stuck in a rut, you want to move to the best part of Australia, and you want to develop your career to the next stage, or even if you think that working in emergency is not for you, but you're open to hearing a different take on that opinion, then stick around at the end. Or if you want to skip that and just find out more about the role because you've always been curious, but something's been stopping you until now, then shoot me an email at vetveldpodcast@gmail.com, and I'll personally talk you through your questions. Okay, now, let's jump in with Kate and Cam. Welcome to Kate and Cam to the Vetveld podcast.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Hugh, for having us. Yeah.
Experienced podcasters. It's so nice to have people with decent audio.
It makes a difference, doesn't it?
Now, this is a big one. I don't really know where to begin with you guys. I will confess, I'm actually a little bit nervous to talk about the stuff we want to talk about tonight. And I'll tell you why. Here's how I don't know if you guys have come across our clinical podcast that we do, where I talk to specialists about their topics of interest. And with that, I leverage my ignorance. I go, well, I'm ignorant about this. I want to ask some questions that can enlighten me. And in that, hopefully also enlighten the people who end up listening to it. And that's kind of what I want to do here in this conversation as well, because I'm ignorant about a lot of these things. But when I talk about clinical stuff, at least I'm informed enough to know what my blind spots are. Whereas with this, I feel like I'm so ignorant. I don't even know where to begin with a lot of these things. And then secondly, when I ask clinical questions, it's very unlikely that I'm going to offend anybody or trigger anybody. And with this, I'm worried that not specifically you guys, but even somebody listening. So I almost want to start by saying that when we talk about inclusion and those sort of, I don't know, inclusion, what are we going to talk about? How would you guys describe the topics that we want to address tonight?
Inclusion definitely is the term that I would go with. What do you think, Cam? I think diversity and inclusion is the term that I normally use. Let's put it that way.
Yeah, it's interesting. I actually recently watched a TED talk about diversity and inclusion, and we often see it lumped together as the one term. Diversity and inclusion, almost like one continuous word. But the speaker, Rocha Lorenzo, I think she's based in the US, she was speaking about how, it wasn't Rocha Lorenzo, it was Janet Stovall. She spoke about how it's actually two things that are subtly different, where diversity is essentially a numbers game. And so that's something that we can actually mandate. We can have diversity expectations of organizations. In my case, I am mostly based at a university, and so there are diversity targets that the university sets for themselves, and then people can hold them accountable if they don't. And so that's where diversity fits in. And then inclusion is really something that we're all involved in. It's about using pronouns correctly. It's about making people feel included I was speaking to somebody recently about using their traditional Chinese name rather than using an English name that most people would expect of them to, quote unquote, fit in Australia. It's little acts that we can and should always be incorporating into our lives.
Yeah. I think that inclusion's kind of about the heart in a way for me. Diversity is just about the facts, whereas inclusion's really about the emotion and the heart. I completely agree that they are different, but yeah.
All right, well, let's see what I can learn. And I apologize in advance if I step on landmines, but you guys are going to help me. And maybe my stupidity can teach other people. Again, I do wonder about my suitability as the host of this. Either I'm very qualified or very poorly qualified as the straight white, middle-aged, married man with 3 kids.
The cis guy, yeah.
who happens to be from a country who for a very long time was probably the world champion in exclusion and legalizing the lack of diversity. So yeah, maybe it makes me extremely qualified to ask these questions. We'll see. Should we begin though by getting to know you guys a little bit? I see you guys on the networks out there, and I've read about you, Cam, in a magazine, but I want to get to know you a bit better. So should we start with our lead-in question of bad decisions lead to good stories? I saw it on the side of a building once, and I like that, and I wonder if it's true. I personally think it is. I don't know who wants to go first. Do you guys agree with the statement that bad decisions lead to good stories? And do you have an example for us?
Yeah, I think they can definitely lead to stories. Whether they're good or not can depend. I guess something that sprung to mind for me, I'm from Tasmania. I'm a Tasmanian Aboriginal man, so grew up there, and it felt a little bit daunting to leave the state. We can sometimes come off as a little bit backwards down there, but it's hard as a youngster thinking about leaving home. And so when I graduated from high school and was thinking about university, despite all of my better judgment, I applied for medical school at the University of Tasmania. I think partly also because all through high school we were sort of trained that being a human doctor was the pinnacle of all achievement, and so that everybody should aspire to that. And I think I fell into that trap a little bit, despite wanting to be a vet since I can remember. And so got in and made the decision to actually start studying human medicine, and did that for about 6 months, long enough, unfortunately, to acquire the HEX debt, and hated it, absolutely hated it. I didn't feel like I was amongst people of the same mindset. There were people there who openly admitted that they were in it for the social status and the fancy car and the big paycheck. And I, felt pretty uncomfortable there. And so, I learned a few things, mostly about myself, I think, in that situation. But it also gave me the time, instead of just going straight into vet school, it meant that I was out of medical school after 6 months, and then had a lot more time to spend doing other things. So working and traveling for another 1.5 years after that. And I think spending that time traveling in particular, I always have been a big introvert, but that really helped me come out of my shell quite a bit. So it was a terrible decision to undertake studying medicine, but I think it was ultimately led to some pretty transformative processes for me.
It's interesting what you say about how it didn't suit you at all, and people doing it just for the social status. So, and you didn't, or do you do not, or do you ever experience that with vet? Like, do you think we sometimes do it? Obviously not for the money. Nobody goes, want to do vet for the big bucks. But there's a social status to vet, yeah.
Absolutely, yeah. I think that it's interesting. I guess the social status there's a bit of a different approach to it amongst vets. It's more about what we can do, I guess, rather than who we are in the eyes of other people. And I definitely felt, as soon as I started vet school, that I was amongst my peers and part of a community. The competitive nature really came out when I was studying medicine, whereas I felt, even though we were obviously amongst competitive people who really wanted to do well in vet school, there was a lot of collegiality there that I was really drawn to.
And then you say you always wanted to be a vet. How did wanting to be a vet happen for you? Like pre-uni days, what was little Cam's life that made him want to be a vet?
I think pretty similar to a lot of people, surrounded by animals from a very young age, living on a hobby farm from the time that I could walk, basically, surrounded by cattle, helping with calvings, getting tadpoles out of the dam, playing with the ducks and chooks, and a bit of everything, really. So just being surrounded by the animals and really inspired by them, I think. And one of my mentors, Professor Liz Tudor, who has done a lot for me in my career, she often speaks to the vet students at Melbourne Uni about how for a lot of people in their careers, it's a particular person that inspired them along their career path. But she thinks it's sort of her idea that for vets, it's probably in most cases an animal rather than a person.
Wow.
Kate, at any point, you can ask questions as well. I like that I've got a co-conspirator.
Yeah, like sort of because like we know each other because of our podcast and our connection, but sometimes like bits of our story, like every time we're exploring more. But I love that you talked there, Cam, about that connection to community when you got to vet school, that it was really, and I think that's really, really important. And hopefully we might be able to explore that a little bit later as well. Sort of in talking to Hubert, but also, yeah, like my sort of thing was definitely wasn't a person either that inspired me. It was more like it was the animals.
Animals on a broad term, or was there a particular animal or a particular animal relationship for you, Kate?
Yeah. No, probably animals in a broad term. My mum was a nurse, and the first thing I remember was she was head of radiology at Prince of Wales Hospital. And so I was used to medical settings. And for me, like Cam says, like being a doctor was that whole, like it was the best thing, but also it didn't equate to, I loved, absolutely adored animals. And so my thing was, I thought the very best thing in the world would be to be an animal doctor. So hence vet. And that was like from a super, super young age. I did a year 6 project book on, what I'm going to be when I grow up. And it was like veterinarian. I think that my bad decision, for want of a better term, sort of linking it back to our bad decision, I think was even at that age, and I think, so a lot of people know I'm trans. So I was assigned male at birth. I grew up, I didn't transition to female until, not that long ago, about 7 or 8 years ago. But when I was growing up, there was this thing, like I absolutely wanted to be a veterinarian. That was my life goal. I also wanted to be a girl, but I couldn't see how I could be a girl and a veterinarian. Like it sort of didn't quite match up. There weren't any trans female veterinarians around back in the 1980s, 1990s. So I made the decision to be a veterinarian and suppressed that whole trans, all of that, suppressed it bad, deep, really quite deep. And that decision did cause some trauma and some challenges, and not just for myself, but also for people that I care about, in particular my wife, Tara, and my children to an extent, although less so probably than Tara. However, with our good outcomes, I guess, if I hadn't have suppressed those, if I hadn't have made that decision then, if I had transitioned at sort of, and there were girls who transitioned at back in the 80s and the 90s, there were a number of them. But if I had done that, I probably wouldn't have met Tara. I may not have gone to vet school, and I certainly wouldn't have had our children. We wouldn't have had our children who are absolutely adorable and gorgeous, and I lived my life for them and for Tara. So yeah, bad decision, good outcome. Yeah, it's a good question.
In terms of answers we've had to this question, I will say that the magnitude of your decision probably trumps everything we've had so far.
The funny thing is, I just don't know that, and I don't even know if it was conscious per se or it was unconscious. It's life's a journey, and there's lots of decision points on that, and I think you can only do your best. And I think the reason I sort of did have a challenge with this question, I think, was the whole point of bad. What is a bad decision? Yeah. I think that most people make the best decision they can at the time with the information that they have and sort of the feelings that they have at the time. And in retrospect, we go, was that a great decision? I've had family members make some pretty horrendous decisions about my life, but they did their best at the time. Yeah, I don't know. That was the challenge I had with that question.
Yeah, I never really analyzed the question when I decided to. When I chose it, it was kind of a flippant decision of, oh, we can get some fun stories out of that. I decided to go on this adventure, but it was clearly a bad, dumb decision. But all these exciting things happened to me that I can laugh about now. But it is actually a loaded question, because exactly what is a bad decision? It is what you make of it, and what is a good story. A good story doesn't necessarily mean a happy ending. It's just a good story. It's a story.
Yeah.
I was recently introduced to the concept of type 2 fun, where type 1 fun is just, fun, but type 2 fun is, it's terrible at the time, but you look back on it and think, it's when you got caught out in a rainstorm and it was absolutely miserable, but then you got a good story out of it. So yeah, it sort of sounds like type 2 fun.
Is veterinary practice type 2 fun?
It definitely can be. I think I've had some days where I was, out doing carvings 2 hours drive from the clinic and cut my hand with a fetotomy knife. I think, that makes for a good story, but I was pretty unhappy at the time.
Exactly right. Okay, it's your story. I'm fascinated. I've never had the opportunity to ask some of these questions, so I'm going to ask some questions, because it's something that it's so foreign to me. I'm really fascinated by it. So you said as a kid, I wanted to be a vet. I wanted to be a girl. Easy to verbalize and understand that I want to be a vet. Was it a similar clarity for you, even as a youngster, to go, I want to be a girl? But you couldn't verbalize it because of culture and society? Or was it just, what did it feel like? What did it feel like before you got to that decision?
That is an amazingly insightful question, because and I tell you why. Because one of the biggest challenges we have is that, and particularly for transgender youth, is that oftentimes trans youth have these feelings and we don't know how to verbalize them. And this is also, like, I'm growing up back in like the 70s. So I was born in 1972. Warning for your listeners, I graduated last century, people. Yeah, so the language around this type of thing didn't exist. And even now it's a challenge. And what we find is that a lot of times it surrounds a lot of trans and gender diverse people. They come around to identifying who they are by identifying who they're not. And I think what it was for me, I just felt like I was just not male. And it is a challenging feeling to describe that, in the same way that I think it's hard for me to understand how a cis person feels about their body and their gender and how that also matches up. But I guess the other analogy I can give, which comes along much later in life, was that once I started exploring my gender, and then in particular for me, once I started medical therapies to transition. So not every trans person pursues medical therapies to transition. I do and have done. But once I started pursuing medical therapies, and in particular hormone therapy, it was very much like the world suddenly was in colour. It was like a veil had just been lifted, and I could actually I didn't realise how much I had filtered all my life. And so I had been, like, I'd tried to express some of these feelings to family members when I was younger and had been told they were wrong and I'd been told they were wrong, and you're young, you want to be loved by your family. And they just didn't have an understanding. But I probably didn't realize for a very long time how much I'd placed a filter and had like literally every thought in my head before I did or said anything went through a filter of, how will this be perceived? Will I be perceived as being male and socially accepted? And so that was the feeling that I had, and it just gradually built up, and to a point where it was just no longer tolerable. The person who I was on the inside was sort of screaming, going, I have to be able to express this to the outside world and have someone else see that, someone else see who I am. That's a really complicated answer, isn't it?
I wouldn't expect it to be simple.
No, exactly. And same thing for you, Cam. Please, if you have questions, please ask him. I'm trying to picture it. I'm trying to imagine it. I'm trying to have empathy for it, not an understanding empathy, but a feeling empathy for it. Are there other things that we filter in that way? Do you think other parts of our life or personality that's not a male female thing, but
oh god, yeah, oh totally. Completely. And I think Cam would probably even be better at sort of perhaps answering this one in a lot of respects.
Yeah, I think there's definitely racial aspects there as well. Growing up in Tasmania, even though I am Aboriginal, there's huge loss of Aboriginal culture in Tasmania. So I grew up not really knowing much of my culture. But certainly for people who have lived in and grown up in particularly remote Indigenous communities, there's definitely people that I've spoken to who have lived in cities for schooling, university. There's definitely filters people put on to get by, I guess. Yeah, definitely change the way that they interact with the world.
And not all filters are bad.
yeah, I suppose.
Genuinely, like sort of there are some people who need a filter. Like, and occasionally, like sort of seriously, you do not want to see me at my messy stages, like in my messy places. It's sort of everyone has filters. I think that, and everyone has that way of interacting with the world. I think that the challenge, is when the way someone feels that they have to interact with the world is fundamentally different to who they are as a person. And I think that's where the conflict starts to become untenable and things start to break down mentally. And I think in part this is sort of talked about this online a couple of times. I think a lot of veterinarians feel this because who they are as a veterinarian and who they are as a sort of what they're trying to do. And then the way the world tries to make them be a veterinarian, the way our profession tries to make them be a veterinarian at times, and certainly the way the public tries to make us be veterinarians, those two things can just be in massive conflict, absolutely massive conflict. And I think we end up with a crisis almost of identity, that sort of a veterinary identity, that we're not sure how do we express who we are as veterinarians and maintain that integrity in the face of these pressures.
I really like that way of looking at it. So is it fair to say, so you say filter, but maybe, so we need a filter. So filter is the thing that stops me from, that turns me into polite professional veterinarian when I need to be, yes. But it doesn't distort or betray who I am. And then when it becomes to that extent where that filter is so severe that nothing of who you really are gets to see the light, that's when it becomes an untenable situation. Does that sound fair?
I think that's exactly right. I think that's a beautiful way of summing it up. Yeah, and then it becomes mentally very unhealthy when you're in that situation. That's a super challenging mental health situation when you're in that. When you can't get your identity valid, no one is there validating your identity. That's the space where it can all fall apart very, very quickly.
So examples, and this is for either, Cam, I don't know if you identify this or have recognized it, or Kate, if you want to run with it, to make this practical, specifically in a profession. Where do you see, what about the profession or culture or expectations can impose that distortion or betrayal of who we are on some individuals within their profession? Do you experience anything like that, Cam? I think I maybe do to some degree. So I'll leave it up to you.
That's a very good question. I might have to think about that. Have you got anything, Kate?
Yeah, the great thing about two guests, isn't it? You can always chuck to the other one. But I think, honestly, there are so many things. Like, there are so many things, and some of them are imposed by ourselves. Like the expectation from our colleagues that non-clinical work is not veterinary work. We've all heard that one, haven't we? Are you a real vet? Do you do clinical work? The expectations from clients is probably one of the hugest ones, certainly for a clinical veterinarian. It's massive that you're going to be there available all the time, that you're going to be 110% attuned to all of their sort of needs. And then when you don't fulfill their expectations, for whatever reason that is, and that can be all sorts of reasons. Number one, their expectations can just be absolutely unreasonable. But when you don't fulfill that, suddenly, according to them, you don't care, which I don't think I've ever met a veterinarian who doesn't care. Really?
Yeah, that's like the knife in the heart for any of us, right?
Yeah, it's the killer, isn't it? That's the one. And it gets bandied about by the public, is that, yeah, you don't care. And then that's a massive conflict because it is so fundamental to most people's identity. Like, that's a hard one to shrug off. And I've got a very, very, very firm sense of who I am. But even I struggle with that one at times. So I think you can call this the conflict, or you can call it a crisis of identity, you can call it a moral conflict, you can call it moral distress or ethical distress. We're dancing terms around the same thing. I think it's the same football. We're just looking at it through different lenses, to be honest. Not that I play football, but you know what I mean. So, yeah, we come back to it a lot. I think it's really important because I think that a lot of vets struggle with really understanding who they truly are as a person, because it's not always an enjoyable place to go, examining yourself and finding out who the hell you are. It's a very deep place that you have to sort of go to. And I was kind of pushed there because of who I am. I didn't choose it. Some people choose it, but I was kind of pushed there because of who I am. But I think as veterinarians, we often don't.
Cam, I don't even know I know you do research stuff and I know you do outreach stuff, but just to put us in the picture with because Kate, you're a clinical vet and a practice owner.
Clinical vet, yeah. Yeah, I pretend to be a practice owner.
So what does your working life look like, Cam? And how did you get there? How did we go from uni to where Cam is now?
Yeah, so some of the stuff that Kate was saying about wanting to be a clinical vet and not necessarily feeling a whole vet if you're not involved in clinical work is something I do relate to. After a few years of practice, I started experiencing chronic migraines, which made clinical work pretty difficult for me to continue on with, and which is why I sort of ended up ultimately in academia and pursuing a PhD, because it was something that was that much more flexible where I could have off days and be okay. But I think that something else that's sometimes difficult in that respect is sort of the ladder that we often put in front of ourselves after vet school, seeing that progression, getting through vet school, getting through first year, getting through second year, or even before that, getting into vet school. And then on the other side of it, just thinking, okay, well, what's next? So I originally had ideas of perhaps specializing, and so it always seemed to have a clinical pathway to it, but then that became evident that it probably wasn't that feasible for me. So I do these days, my work is a bit of a mixed bag. So I have been doing a PhD for the last 3 years. It's been a little bit difficult through COVID because a lot of my research work involves field work in remote Aboriginal communities in Arnhem Land, which has been pretty well shut off for much of that time. I do still do some clinical work up there. It's a few times throughout the year. So a lot of spays, castrates, parasite treatments. So pretty basic bread and butter stuff, and certainly not the specialist path that I originally envisaged for myself. But I think that part of my identity as a vet has been coming to realize that I can actually be okay with myself in not having pursued that specialist pathway, and that this basic stuff does a great deal of good, and so that I can actually be pretty happy with that. And it's something that working at the university, so many vet students want to be a part of. So, yeah, bit of clinical work with that, bit of research. I do a bit of teaching in the vet school, and I'm also involved in various committees around Indigenous engagement. So, engaging with Indigenous communities, remote communities in particular, but also student recruitment. So, currently, there are not a lot of Indigenous vets and not a lot of Indigenous vet students, but something that working on and hope to see much more of.
Actually, I want to jump in there because number one, I really want to, because I think that leads, what Cam was saying there, leads a lot into particularly inclusion, but also diversity. But what I actually wanted to jump in on was a question that you talked then, Cam, about like the ladder and what's next. And I kind of wonder if our constant pursuit of what's next, are we just running away from what's now? Like, I wonder if we really spend enough time on what's now and worried that what's now isn't enough for whatever, rather than actually perhaps just exploring what's now, rather than running off to what's next.
Yeah, I think so. I think to a degree, I felt after vet school, perhaps it's hard to put a actual word on it, but probably the closest thing I can come up with is like institutionalized, where there was always some looming deadline or exam or something, and then all of a sudden there wasn't, and it was just about become a good vet, whatever that means. How do I do that? Isn't there some sort of course with exams and stuff that I can enroll in? Isn't there something else rather than, focusing on what am I doing now? How is this experience that I'm now in actually doing the job of, every day making me a good vet?
Yeah. And at the risk of taking over your podcast here, Hubert, sorry, what do you think? I want to know if you think we're chasing, or do you feel like you're constantly running after what's next? And sometimes I think I do.
Oh, it's a constant struggle. It's the constant conundrum of being happy with in the moment. Like, one of the things I strive for is, I don't like the word mindfulness because it has connotations with hippie and woo-woo, but being present in the moment and being grateful for where you are, because this is all you have, right? This moment is all that there really is. But then also not being stagnant and making the most of your talents and contributing to the world. And, I get bored very quickly as well. So put me in the same position for a year or two and I'm bored as shit and I want to do something else. So no, I don't know. I don't know that there is a single answer to that. My answer to that is that both. You can strive and improve, but also be completely satisfied with what is here. But that sounds very zen.
No, I love it. I think I really love that answer because I think you're right. I'm bad as well. I'm like, Tara calls me Sparkle because like if it sparkles and glitters and shines, it's like, oh, let's chase that, just like I did with something that Cam said then. But I think the danger with just holding the here and now is becoming stagnant. That's exactly it. And again, it's all about the balance, isn't it, between those things, like achieving that balance of not being constantly on the run because we're just going to get exhausted, but also making sure that we don't become stagnant. It's very Tao concept.
Yeah, we're going to go even more Tao now. When I try and think about this, I can't remember where I read about this, but the yin and yang emblem, the black and white, I always thought it was sort of good and evil or the opposites or something. But the explanation that I heard that made a lot of sense for me is the wavy line in the middle is the path. One side is order, one side is chaos. And the path is straddling that line, that wavy line, because it's not easy, between order and chaos. And sometimes you will step over into chaos and things will fall apart and it'll be too much and you'll need to go back to more order. And other times, if you get stuck too deep in order, it's boredom, it's stagnation, it's not moving forward, and you need to step back. But it's not a goal, it's not a place you'll get to. It is a daily assessment of, well, where are we? Too much order, too much chaos, and realign and survive.
Yeah, I love that.
That's the way I try and see it, yeah.
We're actually doing a veterinary podcast, listeners, apparently.
Which I'm going to bring it back. Cam, your early experience, I want to make this practical because I think there's a lot of people who in that first 5 years go, oh shit, is this for me? I don't know. And again, that conundrum of, well, the distress I'm feeling, the discomfort I'm feeling, is it because I'm new and it's scary and I'm not there yet and I need to settle into it? Or is it just not genuinely for me? Is it distorting who I really am too much and I need a different path? You talked about when you started, you had these chronic migraines. Was that because of work? Was that a work-related thing, stress thing, or what? Describe that period for you.
Yeah, the short answer is nobody knows. So I was working up in Rochester at a mixed practice at the time, driving back to the clinic, and all of a sudden couldn't see out of half of my field of vision. I thought it was out of one eye, but then closing one eye, it was still half of my vision. Got back to the clinic, thankfully, and then just crashed. Thankfully we had a little couch out the back, just crashed on the couch and couldn't move, couldn't do anything, had the worst headache that I'd ever had in my life because I'd never known what a migraine was before. And then proceeded to have one continuous headache for the next 3 months, just all day, all night, a headache. And so thankfully I had an unbelievably supportive practice who just gave me the time when I couldn't work. And I did my best to do what I could when I could, but had every test under the sun, CTs, MRIs, lumbar punctures, all kinds of things, thankfully ruling out all the nasty stuff, but ultimately never really found out. I went through about 4 different neurologists, many of whom said that it was most likely due to stress, but I think I've never really considered myself a very stressful person, and I think a lot of people who know me would probably say the same. And I certainly wasn't in a stressful role at the time either. I loved my job. They looked after me very well. I wasn't working my ass off. It wasn't a super busy time of year. So yeah, it was a bit of a weird experience, and yeah, it did kind of change my outlook on where my career was going to go. And yeah, I guess probably a little bit of guilt there. I think I did feel bad, even though my clinic Rochester Vet Practice was extremely understanding. I just felt bad that I couldn't be the vet that I wanted to be for them and be the employee that I wanted to be for them, given how understanding and supportive they'd been. So yeah, it's been a bit of a shaping thing, and it has unfortunately cropped up a few times since then. Ultimately, it was after a week and a bit in hospital, and finally managed to break the migraine. But it has, cropped up ever since, and it's something I'm still looking after, and it has interrupted a few stints when I've been trying to do lots of clinical work up in the Northern Territory. A lot of the time just due to the climate, because it's that much warmer up there. It doesn't help getting hot and sweaty and dehydrated when you're trying to avoid migraines.
Shit. That's terrible. So your decision to leave standard practice wasn't I hate practice, this doesn't suit me. It was kind of, well, it was a health issue, really.
Yeah, I was trying a few different things. I went and I did the young vets pilgrimage of going over to the UK just before I turned 30 while I could still get the visa, and did that for a year. Things were okay over there migraine-wise, but it did dawn on me over that time that, it was just going to be difficult. And I really love large animal practice, really love cattle practice. I don't know that small animal practice was ever necessarily for me. I always really struggled with 15-minute consults or whatever it is. I take pride in having the time to be able to do things properly, and feeling like I couldn't do as good a job as I would like to. I often found myself beating myself up a little bit. And so I think that side of things, I enjoyed the variety of mixed practice, but the small animal stuff, I don't think I got particularly good at. And that probably didn't help that I didn't love it as much either. So it was probably a bit of a mix of things. I still really love the work that I do in the Northern Territory. But yeah, as I said, it's, still pretty basic stuff, but still a lot of fun.
I really want to come back to the work you do up there. I'm fascinated by it. But Kate, does any of this resonate with you, what Cam's talking about?
It's an interesting one because despite my life reading like some sort of bizarre soap opera, I've actually been incredibly lucky, like really very, very lucky in my life and in my veterinary career as well. So I was incredibly lucky to go to university when we could go through university with bugger all debt. Realistically, I had HECS and sort of my HECS was like $15,000 or something.
So just for international listeners, HECS is government-funded student loans, basically, right?
It's a government-funded student sort of thing. So I worked, my first job was for an asshole of a boss. Oh my God, he was oh, sorry. Are we on sort of
No, you can
say
whatever you want. But if you're listening to this and you think it's you, it's not you, okay? It's another boss.
It's not you. No, it's not. Trust me. And I lasted 6 months. It was a ridiculously horrendous job. The only reason I lasted 6 months, I think, was because I was at a branch that I was dumped into fairly early on and was pretty much doing that on my own almost. And Tara actually started, had been doing some locuming work and a position came up with a practice and Tara's my wife, sorry.
And also a vet?
Also a veterinarian, yeah. Veterinary dentist, a much better educator than I am. But she started and she lasted 3 days. So basically we quit. Tara ended up getting another job. I went and actually did 2 years part-time of an environmental science degree. I was still doing some locuming because we were young, but I was mainly just doing the locuming for the money. And I liked being a vet. Like I liked the idea, and I still do. I love, as much as there are days where I really just I wake up and it's like, oh God, do I really need to go to work? But I actually like being a vet. I like the fact that we can fix things. You go in and you do stuff and it makes an animal healthy and makes it better or makes it pain-free or whatever we do that assists that animal. And most of the time what you do is actually making that animal more pain-free, happier, helping it actually get better. And I like that.
Especially when you give it bread. Sorry.
Yeah, totally, completely. But
sorry.
So I think sometimes we get so disenchanted by what's inflicted on us, and it is inflicted on us either by workplaces or by the public or whatever sort of happens. I think sometimes we get so disenchanted that we deflect that emotion of disappointment onto, and we go, I'm disappointed in being a vet and I made the wrong choice. And I just don't know that that's necessarily always the case. And I think if you're in that situation I think we started out this conversation, didn't we, with the question as to what are we sort of like with younger vets for, they're feeling like their careers aren't going where they want them to be or whatever it is. I think if you feel like that's the case, what I'd say, number one, get out of the situation. Just genuinely, just leave. But the second thing is take a bit of time and step back and actually just go, okay, what was it about being a vet or doing veterinary work, and what was it about working with animals that really gave me that sense of identity of who I am? And if that's still there, maybe you might want to come back in to the profession. Maybe if it's not there, maybe it changes. If that feeling is no longer there, maybe it's just not there, and maybe you need to go and do something else, and maybe that feeling will come back and you may decide to come back to the veterinary profession in some capacity or some way, and maybe you won't. And you're not a failure. It's just a different life pathway.
It's a great answer because in my mind it is, if you're in that dissatisfied situation, there's a couple of questions that you got to ask them, or that you ask yourself from personal experience. The first is it me? Like, am I unsuited to this role or to a clinical role or whatever role you find yourself in? Is there a mismatch? Is the filter too strong? Is it too distorting of who I am? Or is it the career's fault? Like, is it the culture around the career, the expectations, the long work days? Are there practical factors that's making it bad? Or is it just this job? Is it this job? It's not that I don't like being a vet. I just don't like being a vet in this job for whatever reason. And I like that stepping away, because I feel like a lot of people think that once you're out, you're out. There's no coming back. But actually going, well, I'll take a break, try something else, kick a few rocks, try this, see if something else takes your interest. And if you go, well, no, I actually really miss it, I want to go back.
There's a saying in the trans community, once you're trans, you're trans. You can try and suppress it for a while, but you'll probably be back. Maybe once you're a vet. Like, you'll just suppress it for decades. You'll be back.
Cam, does anything to add to that? Or does that gel with your thoughts on it?
Yeah, no, I think taking a break, going part-time, there's various options there, and it works. Like, for a lot of people it works. A good friend of mine took some time out and she went and worked at an ice cream shop for a while, and I couldn't think of a better thing to do, to be honest. I don't think that it would be great for my health because I'd just be eating ice cream all the time. It's probably my absolute kryptonite, ice cream. But yeah, you can do whatever you want. And she's now back in practice and she's found something that works better for her. So she's doing a couple of part-time positions and loving it. So, yeah.
Yeah. Before we move on to your work, Cam, I do want to double click. So the thing that made me finally decide to contact you about this podcast was something you wrote about euphoria, veterinary euphoria versus veterinary dysphoria. Can you share your thoughts on that? Because I really like that.
Yeah.
It kind of ties in with what we just discussed, right?
Yes. It does a little bit, doesn't it? So it was a thing that I wrote. I'd been thinking about it for a while. So we've been talking through this whole podcast about filters and that dislocation between sort of who people think we are and who we actually are. And I think that sort of in the trans community, we're actually kind of used to that because a vast majority of trans people are who they are internally, who we are internally is very different from how we're perceived and how we're treated by other people. And that mismatch creates quite a lot of trauma and sort of anxiety and whatnot. And in the trans community, sort of in trans healthcare, it's actually called gender dysphoria. So it's a dysphoria with who we are. And I think as veterinarians, we can actually get a veterinary dysphoria. So we can actually we go into this profession, and sort of Cam and I, and even we both were wanting to be vets from a young age. But I think most veterinarians come into this job and you want to do good. You come in because you care about animals, you care about doing good, you care about community, you certainly don't come into it because you want to make money. You certainly don't come into it because you want to actually be a pain in the ass or be horrible to someone. And then for various reasons, clients, workplaces and whatever, makes doing that caring that we want to do, it makes it almost impossible. And we're told that we've got to do X and we're told that we've got to do Y. Clients want us to do this, or workplaces tell us that we've got to do a 10-minute consult or whatever it is. And it creates this real mismatch, this veterinary dysphoria. And again, use your own term if you want, ethical distress, sort of moral distress.
I like dysphoria.
I think dysphoria is a good one. So what happened was gender dysphoria for the trans community ended up being, it was originally there to try and help us to identify trans people who needed assistance with actually matching up who we are internally and who society thought we were. And so identifying the people who needed help. So you were gender dysphoric, and so therefore you needed to go and see psychologist, medical practitioner to get hormones, whatever it was. The problem is it ended up being weaponized against us, and it ended up just being used to essentially embed us in this quagmire of controls and negativity that enabled people to tell us who we should be, just tell us who we should be in a different way. What we did as a community, and I think and I don't even know if that we've made a conscious decision, and this is sort of something, but this idea of gender euphoria developed and within the trans community. And basically it was, rather than defining ourselves by dysphoria, we defined ourselves by the euphoria that we feel when we are validated, when we are seen as our true gender, when we are treated in the way that, we need to be treated as individuals. And I think that we need to look at that in the veterinary. I think we need veterinary euphoria. Being a veterinarian is an amazing thing. Being a trans person is an amazing thing as well. It's not horrendous. I actually love being trans. I know it sounds stupid and sort of, and it's not like it's a piece of cake or anything, trust me. But I really I love my life. It's sort of, and I love who I am. And I think that we sometimes forget that, or we find it challenging to find that space as veterinarians. And we feel like we don't deserve that space, maybe. Maybe we don't, maybe we feel a bit like we don't deserve that space, whereas it's like all those things that we want to do, look after animals, care for animals, all of those things that we do on a daily basis, they're amazing. They really are incredible. And I think we sort of need to make sure that we're remembering that and remembering those. The dysphoria and the things that cause the dysphoria, it's not going to make that magically go away. It's still going to be there. It's still going to be the pain in the neck client. There's still going to be the boss that wants you to do a consult in 10 minutes or whatever it is. But there's still going to be the case that goes horrendously pear-shaped, believe me. But those things start to, when you hold on a little bit more and allow yourself to experience the euphoria of the dog that basically came in as a snake bite and you treated it and it's better. That dog's going to die without you, or the poisoning case, or even outside of the emergency stuff, the stuff that Cam's doing. You see an entire community's worth of animals that actually are now lower levels of parasites. They've got better lives. They're not breeding sort of uncontrollably with lots of puppies and kittens everywhere, causing problems, and that's having better health outcomes for the community as well. I think that we need to sort of really make sure that we are genuinely proud of that and actually go, you know what? I'm a veterinarian and I have the right and I deserve to be proud of being a veterinarian. I shouldn't have to apologize for it. I shouldn't have to be constantly trying to justify why I'm a vet.
So if you say you think that maybe we feel like we don't deserve it, is it a question of our perspective or our expectations maybe is that, well, when everything's going well, so when things are getting better and surgery's going well and we fix the snake bite or we get rid of all the parasites, that's just normal? It's nothing to be excited about because that's the expected. Anything less than that is horrible. And then we constantly, the little things that don't go well bring us down instead of going, well, all these things that are going well, it's actually really amazing. I'm really making an impactful difference and it's something to celebrate. Let's be euphoric about it.
Yeah, exactly. And I think even worse, I think sometimes we see all these things going well and we almost expect something's going to go horrendously wrong. Sometimes we sort of go, do I really deserve to have all these cases go really well? I'm about due for a bad one.
Yeah. I've been lucky this week.
Been lucky this week. It's like, no, you haven't been lucky. You've been damn good at your job. You've been really good at your job. You're not just being lucky. So I think that we just... And I sort of said something once before as well. I have a challenge with I think there's a mindset a little bit at the moment. We're getting out of it as a profession, but I think there's still a little bit of a mindset that we constantly want pity. We want people to sort of go, and look, suicide is bad, and the suicide rate for veterinarians, it's bad, and our job is a stressful job and all that sort of type of thing. But it seems to me that as a profession, we're asking for pity from the public. It's like, I don't want the public's pity. I actually want their respect. I want them to respect me. I don't even really want them to love me. Honestly, I got plenty of love from my family. There are some clients that are going to love you and sort of you're going to get connections with them, whatever. But I don't need every client that walks through the door to love me. I just need their respect, and I think that to me sort of ties in a bit with it as well. Like, I think when the trans community was tied up in this gender dysphoria sort of perspective, we constantly wanted pity for the horrendous sort of, if you think suicide rates in the veterinary community are bad, just please don't even go there with the trans community. But, we were constantly looking for pity, like that was somehow going to change how our lives would be, rather than taking the control back and going, you know what, no, I don't want pity. I want respect. I deserve respect. I deserve to be loved. I deserve to have a good life. And I think that we sometimes forget that as veterinarians, that we actually deserve to have a good life and deserve respect.
Cam, where do you find veterinary euphoria or euphoria in general in your work?
I think that for me, the work that I've come to do in remote communities and to connect with the culture in remote communities has been a real source of euphoria for me, both professionally and personally. As I mentioned before, I grew up knowing that I am Aboriginal, but not having much of a connection culturally, so not being able to speak language. Palawa, Tasmanian Aboriginal language, is a reconstruction from remnants of all of the Tasmanian Aboriginal languages. And it's not widely spoken because it's still in the process of being reconstructed. So I couldn't speak language, didn't know much about my ancestral culture. It's something I've come to learn a little bit more about, but to be able to engage with and learn about living, breathing Indigenous cultures within Australia, and also to be able to contribute to the well-being of the entire community, has just been such a source of joy for me, I think, and has been a real source of personal growth in general.
Was that reconnection something that you actively searched out because you felt it missing, or did you stumble across it and then went, oh, wow, there's this thing that I didn't know I was missing?
Yeah, I think I stumbled across it mostly. I certainly didn't know that it was going to be a way that I could combine my search for cultural connection and my career. So I first started being involved as a final year vet student. And really didn't know about it prior to starting university, and just fell in love with it as soon as I started being involved.
I love the integration, like the fact that you've got the veterinary and your cultural connection, like the two connections together. Like you're connected to veterinary community, you've connected to cultural community, and the two together has then created like this synergistic effect of like something that's probably even bigger than the two of them individually. So I really love that idea. I'm mindful of the sort of the whole work-life balance, and we're starting to see a little bit of a change in that discussion, aren't we, nowadays? So that we don't quite do the whole work-life balance. I'm going to do 4 hours of work and 4 hours of life or whatever. We just sort of used to think that actually meant. God knows if that was ever what it was supposed to mean. I don't know. But it's like trying to sort of unhook work from life. I'm not sure really flies when it comes down to it, which is a part of where we talked before, like right at the start, we talked about inclusion. And I don't know if you can ever really be an inclusive sort of or feel included until your workplace. We spend a lot of our day at work, most people, as a general rule. And unless you actually integrate other parts of who you are as a person, that it's not just vet, It's not just, I'm not just going to turn up and just do clinical. No, the clinical podcast is awesome and we need that. But we're not just turning up at work doing clinical on a computer that sort of just does clinic. Yeah, that we actually hold people at work. I think until we get to that point, which I don't think we're quite at yet, then we're going to continue to find challenges.
Well, but you mentioned one of it was you, Kate. I think we mentioned heart in the beginning when we talked about inclusion. Inclusion is about heart. And I'm on the tangent always on this podcast about heart. If we leave heart out of it, then it's doomed to fail.
Exactly.
The work you do up there, Cam, I'm fascinated by it. Is it? I've spoken to a few people who do community work in Aboriginal communities, and it sounds challenging. It sounds like hard work. Is it? How are you finding it, and what are your big challenges other than heat and in the middle of nowhere and distance?
Yeah, it can definitely be tough. It's a whole other set of skills that you tend to develop. A lot of the dogs, well, they're all essentially free roaming dogs, which most people are not that familiar with dealing with. And the dogs are certainly not used to being handled. So if you try to put a slip lead or something on them, they'll start flipping out like a fish on a line. And I think the important thing there is that we don't try to put our, urban Melbourne practice on that and come to understand that actually in the truth of it, 75% of dogs on Earth are free roaming and live like that. And so the dogs that we're dealing with in urban Melbourne or wherever are actually the outliers there. But yeah, it's hot. The dogs don't love being handled, but usually develop skills to be able to dart in and jab them with sedation quick enough before they realize what's happened. But it's a different style of practice. Often we're doing surgery where we can. Sometimes that's outside. Sometimes it's in the community hall, rigging up fluid bags from something. Last time we did it, it was from a little disco setup, I think. And basically doing things slightly differently for various reasons. So, for instance, we'll often do a lot of vets working in those sorts of areas do flank spays, obviously just because once you've jabbed the dog and done surgery, that dog is never, ever going near you again, simply because they didn't really trust you to begin with, but now they know really not to trust you. So at least with a flank spay, you can do your post-op check from a block away if you have to, but ideally, something that you can check on as the dog's walking down the street because, and again, they're not getting cage rest. They're not kept inside. They're back to being free roaming again. So various different things that we're doing there, but it works well for us. And another important part of what we're doing is actually monitoring the effect, because obviously if we're just doing it and not really finding out if there's any improvement that we're making, that, well, why bother? But we take censuses of all the dogs. So we go around house to house. That's where we collect the dogs for surgery. We're giving out parasite treatments as well. And so we're doing a census to check the numbers of dogs per house, the body and skin condition score, if there's any pregnant or lactating bitches there. And so what we've been able to show is that over in Goombalanya in West Arnhem Land, one of the main communities that we work in, looking at the number of dogs per house, we went from 10 years ago, the median was about 6 dogs per house. And over 10 years, we got that down to 2. And that's basically just because these dogs being free roaming, they're going to do what dogs are going to do. They're going to breed because there's no fences keeping them apart. They're going to breed about as much as dogs can breed. And so people in these communities are left feeling pretty powerless with that because they've got all these puppies. There's hormonal dogs that are fighting, keeping people awake at night. People are getting bitten. And so they've got all these dogs that they can't feed. It's hard to get dog food into these communities because they're so remote. Dogs are knocking over bins, scavenging, making a huge mess. And so community morale, when there is just huge numbers of dogs, can be quite low, along with the dog bite injuries and various other things with being kept awake at night. So just by keeping those dog numbers down to a manageable level where people can actually keep the number of dogs that they want to keep rather than the number of dogs that they're left with as a result of that indiscriminate breeding, can have a really profound effect, not just on the health of the dogs. They've all got much better skin. They're keeping their weight on much better, but has an effect on community morale. And then, of course, there's all of the One Health effects of, there's not dogs passing on zoonotic parasites or potentially skin infections to people that they're sharing their environment with as well. So from very basic bread and butter stuff in a vet clinic, desexings and parasite treatments, the knock-on effects can be pretty profound.
Massive. So the dogs are free roaming, but they are owned. Where do the dogs fit into the community culturally? Are they loved animals or are they just a pest?
Yeah, so it's interesting because a lot of the approach by local government historically has been that they are a pest. And so the control efforts has been to go in and cull the dogs because it wasn't appreciated that they were owned and loved dogs just because they're not fenced in. And obviously that hasn't worked. Dog numbers have bounced back. They've come in from other communities. They travel between communities. But yeah, almost all of the dogs that we see, 99% I would say, are owned and very much loved. The concept of ownership can sometimes be a little bit more fluid than what we might be used to in an urban setting. So it may be owned by an individual, by a family, by a group of families, by the whole community. Sometimes gaining consent for surgery can be a little bit challenging because the owner may be a non-verbal toddler. And so we'll speak to the parents and they'll say, oh, yeah, getting it desexed sounds like a terrific idea, but you're going to have to ask him. And he can't say yes. So they're the sorts of challenges that we're faced with. But culturally, they can be extremely important, dogs in various communities around Australia, because quite commonly they are part of the dreaming or creation stories in remote communities, and that's especially so in West Arnhem Land. So that's part of dog dreaming country. So there are stories of two dogs in the area who were involved in the creation of things as important as freshwater sources. So they would travel and dig up the billabongs. So for the people of the area, they're extremely important. They can be important in various other ways as well. They can be part of the really intricate kinship system, which I don't really have time to go into. It's extremely multi-layered, but it's a way of interrelation between people and sometimes animals in the community that extends beyond blood relations. But dogs and sometimes cats can be considered brothers or sisters as well as part of that. So lots of different factors that can come into it, meaning that, yeah, they're very, very important members of the community.
So when we complain about the intricacies of ownership and consent with husband and wife who are not speaking to each other in Melbourne, we have no concept of how complicated things can get.
Absolutely.
I have another big question. And then we've got the wrap-up questions, but we can move it along if you need to get other stuff done or PhD work or anything. Cam, how are you going for time?
Oh, no. Anything to avoid the PhD work.
Talk about stuff that I don't know and that we don't understand. So we wanted to talk about inclusion in specific to the veterinary profession. When I planned for this or try to prepare for this discussion, I got a little bit stuck because in my mind or in my experience, when we talk vet specific, I appreciate this is a massive topic globally on a world scale, on a personal level scale, but I've never experienced the vet profession as particularly exclusive. I've never seen anything that I was really uncomfortable with. But then in thinking about it, I wondered, is that just because I've not been involved in it? I haven't experienced it. Am I just oblivious? So you guys tell me, Is it an issue? And how is it an issue? What have you experienced? And then if so, what do we do about it?
I think that your experience here is not unusual, or your perception is not unusual. And I think it's understandable. And I guess I'd probably give a couple of explanations and I'll talk about a couple of examples with this. I think that I probably didn't realize how much women were not valued and not celebrated until I was fully seen as a woman by our community. And that's a hell of a kicker, including by our profession. And I have been dismissed by our colleagues, both in a more sort of what you would probably call a more aggressive isn't quite the right term, but in an unconscious way, but also in a sort of conscious way of being dismissed as like sort of, what are you going to know about that as far as that goes, despite the fact that I'd sat there 2 years previously and they quite happily listened to my opinion. So I think that certainly does happen. I think I'll talk about there's a thing called the Gender Identity Bill of Rights in the veterinary workplace. So the Gender Identity Bill of Rights in the veterinary workplace is a set of rights for trans and gender diverse people. And when you look at them, they're kind of simple rights. Like realistically, they're pretty obvious. The right to pronouns, the right to names, the right to privacy, those sorts of things. And you sort of go, do we really need that? Like, why do we need it? It should be really sort of fairly obvious that there's 12 rights there, and it should be relatively obvious, the ones that are there. But I can tell you for a fact that I've had at least a half a dozen of them contravened by colleagues. So, for example, I've been asked more times by colleagues whether or not I've had surgery than by anyone who's not a veterinarian. Which is a pretty sort of, you go, oh, is that really? But like when you think about it, it's like, hang on, like you've literally just asked me what my bits look like. Like that's kind of a weird question, people. Like really. Certainly early on, right to names, like sort of, I had a colleague, and I'm sure they'd be quite embarrassed, a lovely person, and I respect them a lot. And I'm sure they'd be quite embarrassed if they I'm not sure if they even remember this, but they basically told me, and this was at least 6 months after I transitioned publicly, and I was very public, really public when we went full time, and they're like, oh, you got to understand really if people get your name wrong. And I'm like, ish, why? Like, I mean, you change your colleagues' names at the drop of a flash. If a woman gets married, it'll suddenly be Dr. Smith instead of Dr. Jones. I don't quite see that, and they don't quite see that it's like, there's a huge amount of importance for a trans person on their pronouns being correct, or someone getting their pronouns right, because it drives to the fundamental core of who we are. So I think those things still exist. I think there's still some fundamental things, like we still get a lot of challenges and issues with bureaucracies, particularly universities, but sort of other bureaucracies as well. Doing things like using students' dead names. So basically someone's name that they no longer use, but because it's still on their university enrollment, that's the name that appears on all of their tests and the name that their lecturer uses. It's like, it's not that hard to sort of to strike that out and sort of do that. So I think there's a lot of things that actually are there. There's a lot more subtle things as well. And I think for me, it's also a matter of people say that you treat everyone equally. And look, a vast majority of people do try and treat everyone equally. They do their best. They really do. The other challenge, though, is that for a trans person just to get in the door of your clinic, they've had to literally brace themselves to walk out their front door, get on public transport or get in their car or walk down the road, face the possibility of goodness knows who shouting whatever slurs they particularly sort of want at them. This is after they've actually basically woken up and found goodness knows how many different news stories about sort of trans people in the media or their Facebook feed. And sort of the first thing I do tell trans people when they're first transitioning is shut your Facebook down for at least 6 months until you're happy with yourself. But just to get in the door, they've already used up that much emotional energy. They've literally got about this much left just to get in the door of your clinic. And it's like, it's that thing about equity versus equality and sort of stuff like that. It's like, does it really, okay, I get that we can't take responsibility for all of society, although we can do our best to try and change it. But does it really cost a lot to actually go, you know what, this person does come from a minority, be that Aboriginal, be that gender diverse, be that sort of culturally diverse, maybe they're linguistically diverse, they don't sort of, they've had trouble actually getting to the veterinarian because they couldn't actually tell the Uber driver exactly why they had a cat in the cage and sort of, and that resulted in a huge argument or whatever. And does it really take a huge amount for us as a veterinary profession to go, you know what, I'm actually going to give this person, I'm going to really try a little bit harder to actually try and make this experience one which actually they feel like they're welcome, they feel like they're valued. And then that's going to mean that they're going to be more likely to listen to me for a start, more likely to probably do what I ask them to with their pet, you know, and we're in the realms of positive discrimination and sort of stuff like that here when it comes down to it. But I think it is probably more just a matter of, yeah, look, I think that it's all good and well for us as individuals to say that we don't see ourselves as discriminatory or even our profession as discriminatory. But the problem is our profession doesn't exist in isolation in and of itself. We exist in society, and society, whether we like it or not, is still incredibly discriminatory to people from diverse backgrounds, be that whatever the diversity is, sort of neurodiverse, physically diverse, culturally diverse, sort of LGBT, yeah, whatever that is. So I think the statement of, I don't feel like we're that discriminatory, which also in some ways is kind of not actually true when we look at the studies which show that we're the whitest profession in the world. So if we're not that discriminatory, why is it so hard to actually get Black veterinarians, people of colour veterinarians, gender diverse veterinarians, differently abled veterinarians? I think sort of if we really examine the statement, we're probably sort of going to go, actually the evidence doesn't really support it. But if we go back to our chaos order thing, like if we go, oh yeah, no, we're already tolerant enough, like aren't we kind of just stagnant then? We're sort of not really progressing.
Thank you for sharing that, because it does shed light on it for me personally. I feel like I suspect that a lot of the slights or the things that we do wrong as people who don't understand it comes from a lack of understanding. It comes from an ignorance rather than a malice. And sometimes well, I don't know what to do with the situation, so I don't know what to say, and then I say the wrong thing because I'm trying to say that. But I think what dawned for me there was that stuff that somebody who's not in that situation, who's not had that experience of being exactly as you say, anything other than the cultural norm, the standard, something that seems like a small thing. So what do I call you? I don't care if somebody gets my name wrong, but it's because it's not such a big deal for me. I don't really care what you call me. So then I go, well, why are you getting so upset if I got your pronoun wrong? I'm making a big fucking deal about it. But it's because of that lack of understanding. I don't get what that means to that person. In there somewhere you said that we talk about treating everybody the same, but maybe the same is what you're trying to say is the same is not necessarily good enough, because we've got to say, well, considering your background, a little bit more would be ideal, as much as you can muster, really.
Exactly. And also, no one wants to be treated the same. No offense, even when you're a cis straight, heterosexual white guy, like you don't want to be treated the same. Like, you have a value as an individual, and you want that value to be recognised and celebrated. Everyone does. And I think that what we sort of sometimes fail to see is that the value of people who come from diverse minority backgrounds is typically not celebrated. It's typically not actually, because it's the cultural norm for someone who's a cis straight white guy to talk about how they sort of had a great weekend with their partner, and everyone goes, "Oh wow, that was amazing! It sounds like you had a great night, but oh, happy anniversary," and sort of stuff like that. Happy wedding anniversary. It's only been, well, it has been 6 or 7 years now. It's only been 6 or 7 years that LGBTIQA people could get married, let alone have anniversaries. So those things are sort of kind of still there, and it'll take a while for that to come out. But I stuff up too. Like, I get it wrong as well. Like, I'm not a paragon of virtue, God knows. The other day I stuffed up on sort of the podcast, asked Cam a really stupid ass question on our podcast that was just like, and I just made like this major assumption that was like, what's the one thing that we could do in I know Cam's now being humble about it. It's like, what's the one thing we could do to make practices inclusive of Aboriginal people? It's like, oh, for God's sakes, Kate, there's a fucking 1,000 things that I've really blown your explicit thing now, haven't I?
I don't have. You can swear as much as you want. I never said you can't swear.
There's 1,000 things that we've got to do, both as a society and ourselves as veterinary practices. But now I'm creeping into Cam's territory, so I think we should go to Cam.
So, Cam, what's the one thing that we can do to make
Ice cream, I think. Going back to what we were talking about before, just free ice cream, I think would work pretty well for me. No, I think as a fair-skinned, cis, straight man, I certainly have a heck of a lot of privilege. And so it's something that I certainly didn't notice to begin with, and something that I have learnt a lot about and have a lot to learn about. And the more I look, the more I find, I guess, in the world around me. But I suppose that the area that I'm more closely associated with is, as Kate was talking about, getting the foot in the door. And so diverse students entering the profession. And so I guess something that I'm interested in is, what is it about the university or the course that means that we're not getting Indigenous vets or neurodiverse vets from coming through? Is it something that we're doing wrong? Is it something earlier on? I think certainly for Indigenous students, there's still not the societal appreciation of Indigenous minds. I think Indigenous people are praised for their prowess on the sporting field or modelling. I think that it's changing a little bit. There's appreciation for Indigenous knowledge as it pertains to astronomy, native foods, and things like that. But I think there's just a lot of things that, and it's probably not yet trickling down to kids as well. So I think they're oftentimes still seeing themselves as future footy players or whatever else, but not as much as scientists as I would hope that any kid, would be able to do. So yeah, I guess the where to go with it is a hard thing. Unfortunately, there isn't one single thing that we can probably be doing. I think that there's a lot of truth telling to be done in schools and in the broader community. A lot of closing of gaps in outcomes in Indigenous education. And I think sometimes the picture that can come across when we potentially think about diverse people entering the vet profession, and it's certainly not always the case, but there's sometimes the risk of the discussion going in a way that look at where this person has got despite their diverse characteristics. And I think that we really need to reframe that and think about it as look at the advantages that their diversity brings to the profession. Look at this person who is multilingual and will go really far in communicating with their clients. Look at this neurodiverse individual who has lived with assistance animals and will have a much greater understanding of their needs and what that means to their clients. Look at this person who has lived in a culture where animals hold particular significance and what understanding that will bring to their practice. So I think there's a bit of a reframing that could perhaps occur there.
So instead of well done for being more like us, despite where you came from, it should be much more of, well, thank goodness you're here because we've been missing you. We've been missing what you can bring.
Exactly. That is so well said. That's just perfect, isn't it?
I'm still mulling that over because that is a shift for me. Because it is. Look, I can tell you my background, and I do wonder, Cam, and the challenge that you discussed there of getting more diverse people into this very white profession of ours. And we had the same thing in South Africa when I was a student at uni. Our university said we want, I think it was 30 or 40 or even up to 50% African background students in the vet school. Otherwise, you're going to be in trouble. So they kept spaces. And then the year would start and there'd be 1 or 2 out of 120. But it was just because there was no interest. But it was that because there wasn't that role model. There wasn't a Cam that I could look to and say, hey, that could be me. Oh, I want to be a vet because my neighbor was a vet. Whereas I knew lots of kids whose dads were vets, so that was a career option for me. Is that where it comes from?
Yeah, I think there's the old saying of if you can see it, you can be it. And if you're not seeing it, well, gosh, yeah, where do you go?
Well done for being visible, Cam.
It's really hard to be what you can't see, isn't it? And that goes back to where I was explaining right at the start. Like when I was a kid, like there was no trans veterinarians. Like, how do you do that? How do you be an Aboriginal veterinarian? How do you be like a neurodiverse veterinarian who's, high autistic sort of function? How do you be a deaf veterinarian? That's a tough pathway to forge.
I'd be curious to know what happens because it's 20 years since I was there. And again, we had that 1 or 2 in our class who qualified with us. And then I wonder now, 20 years later, now do we have 10 or 15 or 20 people who are interested because Katlego, who is in the class with me, is now a role model in his community, maybe. I don't know. I hope so. I believe it. I believe that it's true, right? Otherwise, we wouldn't be on this path. You guys have an event coming up. You guys are organizing it, right? Tell us more.
Yes. So the Veterinary Kaleidoscope Summit. So basically where it sort of came down to was out of the podcast, we were like, wouldn't it be amazing if we got all of these people together and got everyone and in the same room? Like, what sort of a room would that be like? Can you imagine being in that room with a, deaf veterinarian, bipolar veterinarian, Aboriginal vet, multiple genders, sexuality, neurodiverse, all of these people in the one room? And okay, it's probably going to be chaotic, but we don't see that. Like, sort of those people kind of are in spots, but you also never hear their voices. Like, you don't really hear the voice of a deaf veterinarian. You don't really hear the voice of a physically disabled veterinarian. You don't really hear the voice of a trans veterinarian or an Aboriginal veterinarian at traditional most veterinary conferences. So we thought, okay, let's put us all in the one room and talk about it. Let's talk about diversity and inclusion. And I'm obviously heavily involved in the LGBTIQA community, and next year is World Pride. And the theme for World Pride is Gather, Dream, Amplify. And so we said, okay, we're going to build an entire conference around that theme, around those themes. We're going to gather all of these diverse veterinarians and their voices and their stories. We're going to gather them together so they can actually tell their stories and they can actually be heard. We're going to dream about what a diverse and inclusive veterinary profession looks like all of these ideas and these concepts of what we think that we want that to look like. Closed captioning in lectures, truly sort of gender inclusive workplaces that provide leave for gender affirmation. And all of these dreams sort of, we're going to get them together. And then we're going to amplify our voices so that they're actually heard. And we actually get something to change. And we don't stagnate, and we do progress. So the 2-day summit is sort of, we're calling it a summit because we just didn't like the word conference. Well, I didn't like the word conference. But the 2-day summit is roughly split into those 3 parts, in that order: gather, dream, amplify, sort of thing, with 20 different speakers and panelists, all from diverse backgrounds. Everyone who's involved in running and organising the summit is from a diverse background. Yeah, so that is TVK Summit on the February the 27th and 28th, which is a Monday, Tuesday of next year, which is 2 days after Mardi Gras Parade. I think most people know what Mardi Gras Parade is in Sydney, don't they, nowadays?
That sounds amazing. Can other people go? I'm feeling excluded.
Oh,
absolutely. There's something for everybody. So it's for people from diverse backgrounds and allies, because it's for people who would like to foster a more inclusive environment in their clinic or their workplace. And we recognize that while I might have my own diverse characteristic of being Aboriginal, I don't have the lived experience of a trans or gender diverse person. But I do consider myself an ally, and I'd like to learn how I can be a better ally. So anybody who would like to learn how they can be a better ally and how they can learn about the lived experience of people from a whole range of diverse backgrounds and lived experiences, there's something for absolutely everybody.
And I think everyone, like Hubert, you've come from a background that I've got no concept of. Like you lived in a country that was incredibly, literally torn apart by racial tension. That's a diverse experience. Like it's about sharing everything and everyone coming together and trying to create something larger out of all of these different things, and not making everything the same, allowing it to be different, but also seeing where the connection points are and allowing us to connect to each other.
I think we've got to wrap. This is epic. I love it. But let's do podcasts, favorite podcasts.
Gosh, I listen to a lot of podcasts. One of my usual favorites is called Queens of the Drone Age. So it's a panel of 4 women who work in tech journalism. I'm a bit of a tech nerd, so I like to listen to that. And they talk about a whole range of different things. I also listen to one called Stop Podcasting Yourself, which is by 2 Canadian comedians. And they just talk about nothing and everything. And it's hilarious.
Okay. That's going to be on my listen for my next commute. I like that. Kate, what about you?
Love it. I'm sort of not a big podcaster. I do listen to Kill James Bond, which is basically, it's like a movie. They started off going through all of the James Bond films and reviewing them all, but from the perspective of what they said about masculinity through the ages.
That's a cool idea.
Yeah. So it's hosted by 3 trans people, like 2 trans women and a non-binary person. But one of the trans women also does a video channel, Abigail Thorne. So she does Philosophy Tube, which is also worth a watch if anyone is into the whole, like the YouTube-y style version of podcasting. She does a very good job of lots of philosophical topics like, should we have the death penalty?
It's like doing a degree in philosophy. She presents it so well.
Okay. The one bit of advice. So let's say every veterinary new grad of the world attends your event next year and you have a couple of minutes. to give them one message for their vet careers?
Cam, you first.
Gosh, there's a few that it's hard to narrow it down to one.
Ice cream. More ice cream.
Always more ice cream. That's a
Ice
given.
cream.
That's a given. I think holding on to your sense of community. I think that holding on to the community that I felt in vet school has been something that has been a huge source of support for me and my classmates, and then broadening that community to other people I've worked with or connected with, like Kate. But particularly in my early years, just after graduation, I think if I was speaking to vet students, which I am often in the fortunate situation to do, it's that nobody will really understand what you've been through like your graduating colleagues, and particularly currently with the vet students who have had to go through their degree, through COVID, through doing all their lecture content or more online, or in all the challenges that comes with that. It's been hard for them to maintain that sense of community because they haven't been able to do things together. But I think it's a really important group of connections that you make that really helps you early on in the career.
Love it. Mine's probably going to go back to an old thing that I actually said, and I still it still holds for me. I would say, be true to yourself. And I think that it kind of comes across as a vacuous statement, and I hate it when it's sort of used in a vacuous way by the whole spiritual gurus. But I'm really meaning true to yourself. Like, know who you are and be true to that. And it's hard. It's really hard because most of the world is going to want you to be who they want you to be, not who you want to be and who you are. But when you are true to yourself and you find people who value you, and this is where it does link in a bit to Cam's thing about community, is that when you find people who actually see you and value you for who you really are, that bond, that's just about unbreakable. It's just about unbreakable. And that can sustain you over almost anything, I think.
So we have that pass it on question. We're trying out the new question where we get the previous guest to ask a question of this guest, and then you guys have to ask a question of the next guest. So the question I got last time from Michael was, what does your average Sunday look like? Cam?
Well, usually it's a trip to local cafe with my partner Joe, but invariably, and it's certainly true of the last 2 Sundays at least, probably more, I'm a bit of a Bunnings fiend, and I just seem to end up there. In fact, I've been known to go with people who are going to Bunnings, even when I don't actually need to go myself. I will go on trips with other people just so I can wander around Bunnings a bit more. I think I just like to wander around and think of all the things that I could make, not necessarily actually do it. I just like to dream a little bit of all these things that I could put together. Yeah, it's a bit weird.
No, the reason I laugh is it's a laughter of complete understanding and empathy. I know exactly what you mean.
I love it. I've just got this image of you two now wandering around Bunnings, just going,
yeah,
I could get that. I could take that pole there, connect it into that bit of wood, turn it into, and there's an entire vet clinic being constructed now, like on the back of a trailer to take up to West Island Land somewhere. So, yeah, my Sunday is much like Cam starts off usually with going to church and having a coffee or morning tea with Tara. But then it will usually consist of me either going for a swim at the local, what do you call those things? Sort of a fitness place. They've got
a gym, like a leisure center.
Yeah, leisure centre. That's what they call them nowadays. Or preferably going for a surf, as we discussed just before we actually started this podcast. And I think because Water is my calm spot. My brain goes 1,000 miles an hour sometimes, as I think you can probably tell from this podcast. And water is the one thing that probably calms my brain. That being able to be really fully immersed in the water and just feel the fluidity of what that is, like the sense of becoming one with something that's so much larger than myself. So yeah, it's the one spot that calms my brain, and the one thing that I really need to do. And if I don't do it on a weekly basis, then Tara will tell you I can become very, very, very scary in terms of how fast my brain tries to keep on going.
Yeah, same thing. I totally get it. Buddings and water. All right, Kate, what is your question for my next guest?
Yeah, so perhaps along a similar theme, do you have a place, and where is that place that's your calm spot? Yeah, where is your place that you feel at one and you can let yourself just be?
Gold. Cam, what about you?
I thought maybe we could share our final question, which is the magic pill question of if you weren't a vet,
oh yeah,
what would you have been? But you have to have lost all of the experiences that you had as a result of becoming a vet. And would you do it? Would you take the pill?
Oh, gold question. Okay, guys, thank you so much. That was magic. You guys are doing important work. You're courageous in what you do and in what you share. And I think it will make a change. I think over the long term, I believe it will make a change. And thank you for what you do. But thank you so much for your very generous time on VetVault.
My pleasure. Thank you.
That's okay. Thank you for having us.
Okay, I promised you at the start of this episode that I would tell you more about the role on offer at AES Palawa, where I work here on the Sunshine Coast. I'm going to have to start with the where of this job, because seriously, why anyone wouldn't want to pack up everything they own and move here is beyond me. I literally sold my own vet business, moved my kids out of school, sold my house, and drove for just over 10,000 kilometers to come live here, before I'd line up any work, just so I could surf the warm water points at Noosa that I discussed at the beginning of this episode, and hike the rainforests of the hinterland, and swim in waterfalls with my family. And that's not an exaggeration. I've done all of those things just this last week. So there's that. Next, I think we should talk about the reasons why you probably think that a job in emergency is not for you. Number one, you think that you lack the skills, that you're not a good enough vet, and that it's all life and death and blood and guts and high-level stuff with pipes sticking out of animals and thoracotomies and shit. It's really not. And you really have the skills to start with us. The vast majority of stuff that you see in emergency is the same stuff that you deal with in GP land, just sometimes at different hours and without appointments. Same shit, but in the dark. What we don't do, though, is anal glands and vaccinations and chronic skins and heaps of revisits and dentals. If you love dentals, then this job is probably not for you. Don't get me wrong, there are life and death things, and pipes and tubes and thoracotomies. But it's not the expectation that you can do all of those things from the start. We have people who support us and who love that stuff. And if you want to learn all of that, great, you're in the right place. We have a mentorship program for experienced GP vets where you will get one-on-one buddy shifts for 6 weeks with an emergency clinician who has completed or is currently studying memberships. And all AEA team members get free enrollment in the 19-week Animal Emergency Service Accelerated Emergency Program run by our sister company, Improve International, which is the only program of its kind in the world. This program is designed to get you feeling confident in emergency in 4 months and will get you some new letters behind your name once you finish it. You can be Dr. X BVSC F Cert ECC, which stands for Foundation Certificate in Emergency and Critical Care. And most importantly, all AEA team members get free access to the VetVault Clinical Podcast. What a forward-thinking company this is. Excuse number 2, I can't do nights. I get you. I did a lot of overnight work for almost a decade, and it's a challenge for sure. It has its perks though. My original motivation to start doing emergency work was twofold. I wanted to see my kids more, and I wanted to serve more. Both things that are very hard to do when you spend the majority of your daylight hours inside a vet hospital. And for 5 years, I loved my schedule. I was always one of the only dads at school pickup and parent helper days, the only person under 60 in the gym at 10 in the morning, and probably the only one in the surf lineup who didn't have to pull a sickie to get in the water when the surf was good. But it's pretty well accepted within the company that night work is not something that most people can do forever, which is where AEA really shines. Because it's a big company and a growing company with many roles to fill and many new roles developing that we don't even know about yet, there are multiple pathways within the company that does not involve saving sick animals in the middle of the night, from leadership and management to daytime clinical roles. We are 24 hours here on the sunny coast, and I personally haven't worked after 7 p.m. for 2 years now. And outside of my clinical work, I get paid to make a team podcast for the company and to go have coffee with our referring vet practices. So yes, we do nights. And if you are of a nocturnal disposition, well, you're in good company here. But there is much more than just that. Excuse number 3. I'm just a new grad. Very valid point. I ran an emergency clinic in Perth, and you wouldn't have wanted to work for me as a new grad because I didn't have the support systems in place that you needed to thrive. AES has an amazing new grad program in place. Not just on paper, like some jobs that promise all sorts of amazing mentoring and support, but really in practice. Here's what it looks like. One-on-one buddy shifts for 6 months with an emergency clinician who has completed or is currently studying memberships. Fortnightly check-ins with the vet manager to discuss progress, set and track goals, and manage challenging cases for the duration of your internship, as well as access to the courses and resources mentioned above. Trust me, you'll be fine. Our newbies are a little bit spoiled actually, just the way that it should be. And I can guarantee you that by the time you've been with us for a year, you will be well ahead of most of your classmates in terms of skills and knowledge. Well, maybe not for vaccinating and spaying. So now that some of your excuses have been addressed, here are a few valid reasons why it might not be for you. We mentioned rechecks. A lack of long-term follow-up with clients is a genuine thing. If you get fulfillment from ongoing relationship with your clients, you won't get that with us. Number 2, if you like orthopedics, nope, we're not for you. Number 3, if you want to do a lot of spays, not going to happen here. We do have some younger team members who do shifts at the RSPCA or elsewhere to make sure that they don't lose those skills. So it's not necessarily a one or the other kind of thing. Number 4, I'm comfortable where I am. And to be honest, I just like going to work, doing things the way I've been doing them for years, referring off the hard things. If that's you, then maybe we are not for you. AES has a culture of learning and continued growth. Note, that's not to say that we have an expectation of perfection, but you will be challenged. You'll be supported while challenged. We're part of a group with some very smart and very skilled people, so help is always just a phone call away. But part of what AEA tries to offer team members is growth. The company has an employee value proposition, i.e., a statement about what they want to offer their employees. And the statement reads, we challenge the heart, support the mind, thrive on trust, and operate with integrity, compassion, and kindness, which I think sums it up nicely. If that's not your bag, then this isn't for you. Now let's talk about some of the other good things. And let's start with AEA as a group. So just to explain the business structure. The individual clinics are part of a parent company called Animal Emergency Australia that takes care of most of the background work and lets each clinic focus on high quality clinical work while they take care of marketing and recruitment and HR and support of team well-being, which I know is a term that is thrown around a lot by everyone in the industry, including recruiters, but also a term that often rings empty once it comes to actually taking action to do something about employee well-being. Not the case at AEA. They have an entire team that just works on ways to make it a better place to work at, from practical issues like how long our shifts are and better workflow and organizing Ubers when you're too tired to drive, to ongoing leadership and self-development training free to all employees, like access to our Animal Emergency Wellbeing Hub, which is our own online health and well-being program. We have access to the Fitness Passport, which gives us heavily discounted access to a range of gyms and pools, etc., as well as initiatives that focus on personal financial fitness and well-being, which includes an employee shareholder scheme in the pipeline, financial literacy training, and of course, a decent pay structure. Because, as I once told a client who told me that all you care about is the money at 3 in the morning, no, it's not all I care about, but at 3 in the morning, I definitely do care about the money. And then finally, a bit more about the clinic on the Sunshine Coast that this ad is actually for. or the Tanawa branch as it's otherwise known. We're not the biggest of the hospitals. We are more what I'd call a high-quality GP emergency clinic. We have specialist support, but we're also happy to refer things that need advanced imaging and bones fixed and stuff like that. We'll have anything from 1 to 5 vets on the floor at any one time, depending on the time of the day and the day of the week, and roughly double that in support staff, which even includes a specialist ECC nurse, which I didn't even know was a thing until I started working here. We're in a newly refurbished clinic in our own space, so everything is all shiny and new. I won't bore you with a list of all the toys at your disposal. Other than CT and MRI, we have it. Our clients are nice, and I know all ads say that, but it's genuinely true. With the vast majority of people willing to go quite far with what needs to be done for their pets, and a high percentage who will go all the way to ventilation and referral for MRIs and the full works. We'll have chill days, and of course we have mental days when the hospital is full of tick cases in a waiting room full of people waiting to be seen. But on the whole, it's not the 7-hour wait times kind of emergency clinic that you hear about. So you might be thinking, yeah, that's what they all say. And then you start there and you find out that things aren't perfect and that there are many things that actually annoy you about your new job. So, is this job perfect? Does AEA have all the problems that we face in vet life sorted out? Of course not. Things could always be better. But here's why I work here and why I'm genuinely happy to do this ad. And don't tell them why I'd probably have done it for free. I believe in the vision, helping veterinary professionals to do and be their best. I believe it because I see people take action to make things better every day, better for our patients and better for our team. Sometimes plans don't work, so we try a different approach. But every week, there is a national meeting where any team member can join in to raise their concerns, bring suggestions, and be heard. And every week, some little thing is better than it was the week before. So is it the perfect job? Hell no. But next month, it will be a better job. And next year, it'll be significantly better. And one of the reasons it will be better is because we'll have you on our team to help us make it happen. If this sounds like the kind of place where you'd like to have your impact while building an incredible life for yourself on the Sunshine Coast, shoot an email to our vet manager, Dr. Travis at tworthington@aes.email, which now that I read it out, looks like it says to our Thington, or contact me first to get more honest feedback at vetveldpodcast@gmail.com.